An Iranian ballistic missile punched through the perimeter defense of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia this morning, struck the flight line, and damaged multiple U.S. Air Force KC-135 Stratotanker refueling aircraft parked in the open. Service members were wounded. Satellite imagery confirmed fires burning on the apron where American tankers had been lined up, wing to wing, on the same stretch of tarmac they have occupied for weeks. U.S. Central Command has not commented. The damage is still being assessed, and this is the second time in less than a month that the same base, hosting the same aircraft, has been hit by the same adversary, using the same method. That is not a lucky strike. That is a pattern. Before we get into the full scope of what this means, and it means more than you are being told, thanks for watching. Your support is what keeps this analysis going, and every subscription, every like, every share genuinely matters. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. Now let's get into it. To understand why the strike on Prince Sultan matters far beyond the footage of burning tarmac and damaged airframes, you need to understand what the KC-135 Stratotanker actually is and what it actually does. Because this is not a story about 5 airplanes. This is a story about the architecture of American power projection in the Middle East and what happens when the scaffolding starts taking hits. The Boeing KC-135 is, in the simplest terms, a flying fuel station. It carries more than 200,000 pounds of transferable fuel, and its sole purpose is to meet combat aircraft in the air and extend their range and endurance. Without tankers, an F-15 launching from a base in the Gulf has a combat radius measured in hundreds of miles. With tankers, that same F-15 can operate over Iranian airspace for hours, strike deep targets, and return. Every bomber sortie, every fighter sweep, every surveillance orbit that operates at range depends on the tanker fleet. The KC-135 is not a glamorous aircraft. It does not fire weapons, it does not appear in recruitment advertisements, but it is the single most critical enabler of the entire air campaign. Without it, the operational geometry of Operation Epic Fury collapses from a theater-wide air dominance campaign into a series of short-range dashes from Gulf bases. The United States Air Force operates approximately 376 KC-135s across active duty, reserve, and Air National Guard units. That number sounds large until you account for maintenance cycles, training rotations, and the global distribution of tanking requirements: the Pacific, Europe, CENTCOM, Homeland Defense. The available fleet for the Middle East theater is a fraction of that total, and that fraction just got smaller. Not once. Twice. 2 weeks ago, an Iranian missile strike hit Prince Sultan Air Base and damaged 5 KC-135s on the ground. The aircraft were parked on the flight. Line exposed, unprotected by hardened shelters, clustered on a single apron. The damage was significant enough to ground all 5, though officials indicated the aircraft could be repaired and returned to service. No personnel were killed in that strike. President Trump disputed the severity of the damage, stating that 4 of the 5 sustained virtually no damage and were already operational again, while 1 required slightly more extensive repair. The Wall Street Journal, citing 2 U.S. officials, reported the damage was more substantial than the president's characterization suggested. That gap between what was communicated publicly and what the operational reality appears to be is not a minor discrepancy. That gap is the story. Because while the political messaging was focused on minimizing the significance of the first strike, the operational environment did not change. The tankers were not dispersed. The base defenses were not upgraded to a level sufficient to prevent a repeat. And today, less than 3 weeks later, Iran struck the same base again, with the same combination of ballistic missiles and unmanned drones, targeting the same flight line, hitting the same type of aircraft. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is not a failure of warning. That is a failure of adaptation. Now consider what Iran sees when it looks at Prince Sultan Air Base. Iran sees a base located approximately 600 kilometers from its coast, close enough that a ballistic missile launched from western Iran can reach it in 6 to 8 minutes. Iran sees an installation that hosts the densest concentration of American aerial refueling assets in the theater. Iran sees satellite-identifiable parking aprons where high-value, low-survivability aircraft are arranged in neat rows without hardened aircraft shelters. Iran sees a target whose destruction does not require penetrating the most defended airspace in the region. It requires only reaching Saudi Arabia, which Iran has demonstrated it can do repeatedly. Iran's targeting of the tanker fleet is not random. It is not opportunistic. It is the product of a strategic calculus that is both rational and, from a military standpoint, elegant. You do not need to shoot down an F-35 if you can destroy the tanker that keeps the F-35 airborne over your territory. You do not need to overwhelm American air defenses if you can strike the logistics chain that makes those air defenses relevant at range. The tanker fleet is a center of gravity. Iran identified it. Iran targeted it. Iran hit it. And then Iran hit it again. The question is not whether Iran's missiles are accurate enough to reach Prince Sultan. They have answered that question empirically, multiple times. The question is whether the United States has a credible plan to protect the assets that make its air campaign viable. And the evidence available today suggests that it does not, or that the plan it has is not being executed at the speed the threat demands. The arithmetic of this situation is what should concern you most. In the span of less than a month, the U.S. Air Force has lost operational access to at least 5 KC-135s from the first Prince Sultan strike, with additional tankers damaged in today's second attack, the full count still unconfirmed. Separately, a KC-135 crashed in western Iraq after an apparent mid-air collision with another KC-135, killing all 6 crew members aboard. That incident remains under investigation and has not been attributed to hostile action, but the aircraft is destroyed regardless of the cause. 3 additional F-15 fighter jets were lost when Kuwaiti air defenses mistakenly engaged them in what CENTCOM described as apparent friendly fire. Add those numbers together. In less than 4 weeks, the air campaign has absorbed the loss or degradation of more than a dozen airframes, tankers, and fighters through a combination of enemy action, operational accidents, and friendly fire. Each individual incident can be explained, each can be contextualized, each can be minimized in a press briefing, but the aggregate is a different story entirely. The aggregate is a force that is being worn down across multiple vectors simultaneously, and the replacement pipeline for the KC-135, an aircraft that has been in service for more than 60 years, is not moving fast enough to absorb this rate of attrition. The Boeing KC-46A Pegasus was supposed to be the replacement. Approximately 100 have been delivered to the Air Force, but deliveries were paused for several months in 2025 after structural cracks were discovered in multiple airframes, and the program continues to struggle with technical deficiencies, including persistent problems with its refueling boom system. The KC-46 is not yet a reliable, fully operational replacement for the KC-135 at scale, which means the tanker fleet that is sustaining the current air campaign is the same aging fleet that has sustained every American air campaign since the Eisenhower administration, and that fleet is now absorbing combat losses for the first time in its operational history. What this means for the personnel on the ground at Prince Sultan Air Base is something that deserves its own consideration. Army Sergeant Benjamin N. Pennington, 26 years old, died days after being wounded during the March 1st attack on the base. He is one of the names that will be read at a memorial service and then largely forgotten by a public that is consuming this conflict as a newsfeed. U.S. Central Command confirmed that more than 300 service members have been wounded since the conflict began. 300. That number was disclosed almost as an aside in a broader statement about operational progress. The service members stationed at Prince Sultan did not choose the parking arrangement of the tanker fleet. They did not choose the base defense architecture. They did not choose whether hardened shelters would be constructed or whether aircraft would be dispersed after the first strike. Those decisions were made above them, and the consequences of those decisions are being absorbed by 20-year-olds in flight suits and ground crews working 12-hour shifts on a flight line that has now been hit twice. The gap between the official characterization, virtually no damage, planes already back in service, and the reality of wounded troops, burning aircraft, and a dead sergeant is not a communications problem. It is a trust problem, and trust, once lost in a conflict zone, does not return on a convenient schedule. The political dimension of the Prince Sultan strikes extends well beyond the base itself. President Trump, speaking at a Miami event sponsored by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, on the same day the base was struck again, urged Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize diplomatic relations under the Abraham Accords framework. The timing is notable. The president is asking Saudi Arabia to deepen its strategic alignment with the United States and Israel, at the same moment that Iranian missiles are striking a Saudi airbase that exists primarily to host American military operations. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry has been shooting down missiles and drones targeting Riyadh itself. Kuwait sustained damage to port facilities, including infrastructure linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative, marking what appears to be the first time a Chinese-affiliated project in the Gulf has come under assault in this war. China continues to purchase Iranian crude. The alliance architecture that was supposed to contain Iran is instead absorbing the consequences of a war that Iran did not start, but is fighting with a coherence and targeting discipline that the coalition has not yet matched. Every Gulf state that hosts American forces is now calculating the cost of that hosting arrangement against the protection it was supposed to provide. That calculation is happening in real time, in capitals where the sound of missile defense interceptors is no longer theoretical. The broader strategic picture is this. The United States is conducting a large-scale air campaign against Iran that depends on a tanker fleet it cannot adequately protect, from bases it has not hardened, in a region where its allies are absorbing collateral damage they did not sign up for, while the adversary demonstrates a capacity to strike the same target repeatedly with improving precision. The Air Force has announced it is now undertaking steps to scatter aircraft around the region to reduce the risk of another concentrated strike. That is the correct response. It is also the response that should have been implemented after the first strike, not after the second. Dispersal increases survivability, but decreases efficiency. Aircraft spread across multiple bases require more coordination, more fuel for transit, more maintenance infrastructure at each location. The operational cost of dispersal is real, and it is a cost that Iran imposed not by destroying the tanker fleet, but by demonstrating that it can reach it. That demonstration, the ability to reach, to strike, to damage, and then to do it again, is itself a strategic weapon. It forces the United States to either accept the risk of concentration or absorb the cost of dispersal. Either outcome degrades the air campaign's effectiveness. Iran does not need to destroy every tanker. Iran needs to make the tanker fleet's operational posture more expensive, more complex, and less reliable, and by that measure, the strikes on Prince Sultan Air Base have already succeeded. This brings us to the question that no briefing has addressed and no official statement has acknowledged. If the United States could not protect its most critical aerial refueling assets at one of its most established forward operating bases, a base it has operated from since 1990, a base it returned to in 2019 specifically, in anticipation of conflict with Iran, a base where it concentrated 22 KC-135 tankers, 53 F-16s, 10 C-130s, and additional aircraft under shelters as recently as last summer, if it could not protect those assets from a strike it knew was coming, from an adversary whose capabilities it has tracked for decades, from a launch point whose location is not a mystery, then at what point does the question shift from whether the air campaign can achieve its objectives to whether the infrastructure sustaining the air campaign can survive long enough for those objectives to matter? That's the question that Prince Sultan Air Base is asking, and so far the only answer has been another column of smoke rising from the same flight line, on the same base, less than 3 weeks after the last one. Thanks for watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think this means for the next phase of this conflict. Make sure you are subscribed, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to see it. I will see you soon.